Hello again, it's Miss Cone. So we just read chapter 19, and I asked you to think about that last sentence. I'm going to reread that last sentence so we can think about it again. The last sentence says, he knew where he'd been, but what was most important was still missing, Mac. So I asked you to think about that, and when I thought about that, I was thinking, he knew where he'd been. So now he's realizing his past. I think it's coming together in his head that maybe the children's home was somewhere that he lived. He was there. And he now understands that. But all of his questions, even though they're starting to become answered, he's still thinking about someone else. He's thinking about Mac. And he's wondering, how does Mac fit into all of this? So let's read the next chapter and see if we can figure that out. In this chapter, you're going to hear a few new vocabulary words. Our first word is simmering. If you're watching this, can you say simmering? So when something is simmering, it's usually sitting on a stove, kind of staying warm, getting hotter. So sometimes we could say the soup was sitting on the stove, simmering. Or simmering can kind of be a person's emotions. They're simmering, they're getting hotter, getting angrier. Another word that's going to come up in our text is going to be callus. A callus is something usually on your hand. It can be other places that gets kind of rough or bumpy from working super hard. So I'm wondering if Sam is going to be doing some work in this chapter. All right. This chapter is called Anima. I'm wondering how that character is going to come into the story. All right. Chapter 20, Anima. Take the notebook, Sam, Caroline said. They were standing on the corner near her house. There were tears in her eyes. Learn to read, Sam, then write to me. Ooh, I'm going to stop right there. I wonder if this is going to be the turning point for Sam. Is Sam going to learn how to read? I remember that Anima used to read to Sam, so maybe that's how she's involved. Let's see. He could feel the anger simmering. Do you think I don't want to? But this was Caroline, and he saw her face redden. I'm sorry, really sorry, he said, but I gave up on that. Draw pictures. Put letters together any old way. Don't worry about spelling. I'll understand it. The tears were running down her cheeks now, but she didn't pay attention to them. Maybe. I'll try. He knew he couldn't do it. Would he ever see her again? One thing, he said, and she smiled, brushing her tears away. I would never have found out as much as I did without you. He started down the street, and she called after him. One thing. You'll be my best friend forever. He raised one hand. He could hardly see her through his own tears. He turned the corner and began to run. Wondering why he's running. He stopped at the workroom door to say hello to Mac. Mac looked up. I'm sorry she's leaving, he said. Such a nice girl. Anima's made something for you. Crepes, I think. Sam nodded, tried to smile. He walked along the back of the building, waving to Onji, and opened the kitchen door of Kerala House. Hey, sweetie. Anima looked up from the sink. I've just made banana crepes for you, and we'll have a cup of tea. She pointed to the chair and put a plate in front of him. How was he going to eat anything? Anima gave a quick shake of her head, then poured tea for them both and sat opposite. She stirred a little sugar into her cup. I'm sorry about Caroline, she said. He took a gulp from his own cup. So much had happened today. We took a bus to Waterway. She glanced toward the window. A long ride, but it was lovely out today. A day you'll remember. He glanced at her. Waterway didn't mean anything to her. He could see that. So she doesn't know anything about Waterway. For the first time, he realized she might not know anything about where he came from. He took a breath. Remember the sweater? Could I see it? Would you tell me about it? She blinked. The little blue one with the zipper? He knew she wanted to ask why, but instead she pointed up. Eat the crepe. The sweater's upstairs. Sam listened to her quick steps, the sound of a drawer opening. She brought the sweater back to the table and unwrapped the tissue paper around it. They reached out at the same time to touch it. The wool was stiff, matted, the stitches pulled in spots. I want to know. About when you came? I'm going to read that. I want to know. About when you came? Anima reached for his hand, held it with her own small one. It was a terrible night. With sleet covering the roads, the sound of it against the windows, she shook her head. Wait, let me start from the beginning. I'm going to pause. I think this is a really important part, so I want to make sure our ears are on and we're totally listening because I think Sam's going to find out about his past. Let's see. I'm excited. I want to know. I'm going to reread a little. About when you came? Anima reached for his hand, held it with her own small one. It was a terrible night. With sleet covering the roads, the sound of it against the windows, she shook her head again. Wait, let me start from the beginning. Her hand was even smaller than Caroline's. She bent her head, and he could see a few strands of gray mixed in with her dark hair. I'd come here on my own from Kerala, and I had enough money from my parents to buy this building. But I was lonely, so lonely. She made a chopping motion with her hand. I had someone divide the building into 3 stories. Onji moved in with Ellie. His wife had gone off somewhere. Later, Ellie was married, and he was rattling around in the deli alone. Anima patted Sam's hand. One day, Onji came in. Right at this table, he told me his best friend Mac was on his way here, that he was moving from Florida. He needed a place to live and a place to work. Where? Florida. Anima tilted her head. Onji said Mac was bringing a child from upstate somewhere. She sighed. Mac was supposed to come at dinner time. We'd made all kinds of things, Onji and I, but he didn't come, and we waited and waited. We tried to eat the cold dinner, and we worried. I opened the door to see out, and everything was covered with a crust of ice. It was midnight, then 2, 3, and we sat there, just waiting. His mouth was dry. The boat? Had they been on a boat? Just before light, Matt came in with you. Anima looked up. And the cat. You were soaked. Filthy. Mac looked exhausted. He'd hurt his leg somehow. When I tried to take you from him, he wouldn't let go. He sat down where you're sitting, Sam, rocking you, his head on your head, and his crying was a terrible thing to see. Exhausted. That was the way Sam felt now. A long day. At last I took you. Her eyes were filled with tears. I unzipped the sweater and pulled it off you. You were shivering now, and Mac too. I found dry clothes, toweled you off. We put one of Onji's shirts on you. Huge. We watched you grow into those shirts. She tapped his hand with one finger. You became our family. We never felt lonely again. She sighed. We never talked about that night again. I'm going to reread. She tapped his hand with one finger. You became our family. We never felt lonely again. She sighed. We never talked about that night again. Sam stood up and went around the table. He leaned down to put his arms around her, smelling the sweet face cream she used, leaning his head against her thick hair. I love you, Anima. I love you too. We all do. She reached up and patted his cheek. Would you like to take the sweater now? Sam shook his head. You keep it for me. He went outside and down to the water. Frogs floated on the surface, their throats swollen with song. Nightcat jumped up on Anima's bench, and Sam reached out to pet him. The cat had been lying in the sun, and his fur was warm. Night Cat, who had come with him all the way. All right, so that was chapter 20. So much happened in that chapter. Wow. Let's pause and make sure we understand everything, because good readers always pause to check in. So we just learned that Mac was from Florida, and Mac came from Florida to this place and met Anima and Onji. And when Mac came, Mac told them that he was bringing a child from upstate. So the child wasn't coming from Florida. So I'm trying to figure out how Mac knew Sam. They said the child. He didn't say Mac's child. So I'm a little bit curious about the connection between our two characters and how their relationship started. But I'm thinking a lot more, and I'm thinking about the way Sam reacted to this story. Sam didn't ask too many questions. I'm thinking that if I was Sam, I would be a little bit nervous to find out all of these answers. I want you to put yourself in Sam's shoes. If you were Sam, I want you to think about how you might feel if someone told you that a man named Mac brought you somewhere in the middle of the night. These are really scary things to hear. And I'm wondering how Mac is feeling about these. I hope you're wondering too. I'm excited to read the next chapter and see if we get some more answers.